The prosecution of a Chicagoland autism doctor ends in a surprise. We'll have an exclusive investigative report. Plus, Barbara Sharp joins us with information on how to let the Autism Channel World News know about upcoming events that affect the autism community so that we can share them with our viewers. All on the Autism Channel World News for Monday, January 5th, 2015. Our big story today is our exclusive investigation about an attempt to yank the medical license of an alternative doctor in Chicagoland. It all started with two parents who weren't getting along. Carl Newbiel has the first part of the story, and it's a fascinating one. Carl?
On Christmas Eve, the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation approved an agreement between Dr. Anju Usman and the Medical Disciplinary Board that had one of the strangest outcomes of one of the most confounding cases in the professional regulation of doctors. The controversy went way beyond two divorcing parents. It even spilled over to another doctor in Florida and a diagnostic lab called Doctors Data that came under scrutiny as well. Jeff Levens is the attorney representing Dr. Usman before the board, and he spoke with us exclusively about how this strange case came about.
In approximately 2004, James and Leke Coleman had their child assessed for autism, and then they had him reassessed at 3 years old, and the finding was that he was on the ASD spectrum. At that point, Leke Coleman, who is the mother and was actually born in China, and hence more open to Eastern medical philosophies and holistic medicine. They were very unhappy with the things that were being told by mainstream specialists, and Leke Coleman started going to autism conferences, speaking with other parents, and learned about Dr. Anju Usman. She brought the child to Dr. Usman, and that led to approximately 4 years of treatment of the child by Dr. Usman. At some point, near the end of that 4-year period, Mr. and Mrs. Coleman separated, and Mrs. Coleman filed for divorce. Mr. Coleman went online doing research as to the treatments that the child was receiving, and that was in an apparent effort to try to gain custody of his two sons. In the course of doing that, he came across Quackwatch.org, read an article in which Steve Barrett was accusing Doctors Data of fraud and of conspiring with certain integrative practitioners to give false results on urine toxic metals tests to parents in an effort to trick them into undergoing chelation treatments. And of course, that was false, but that was Barrett's take on it. And at the end of his article, he said, if you feel that you have been defrauded by this practice, please contact me. So Mr. Coleman contacted Barrett, and at that point, Barrett essentially orchestrated what happened next. He told Coleman to get the medical records from the two treating physicians, who were Anju Usman and another doctor who was in Florida at the time and practicing as an adjunct to Dr. Usman's treatments via telemedicine. Once Mr. Coleman received copies of the medical records from both of these physicians, sent them to Barrett. Barrett then sent them to a person that he has referred to as his main consultant, who is an MD/DDS in Boston, to analyze the medical records. Meanwhile, Barrett recommended that Mr. Coleman send letters to the respective medical boards and tender complaints against these two integrative physicians. And Mr. Coleman did so. It's pretty clear that Barrett either wrote the letters or provided significant counsel to Mr. Coleman in writing the letters. The Florida board investigated the Florida doctor and found that there was no violation of the Florida Medical Act and dropped the investigation. Dr. Usman, of course, was not so lucky. The department investigated Dr. Usman, The investigation took about a year and a half. I doubt that they were working on Dr. Usman's case the entire year and a half, but they ultimately filed a formal complaint against Dr. Usman's license. Meanwhile, Mr. Barrett went ahead and referred Mr. Komen to a lawyer in L.A. named David Wilzig. Barrett described Wilzig as a lawyer who is interested in autism fraud cases. Wilzig called Komen, and Komen ended up retaining him to represent him in a civil lawsuit that was filed against Dr. Usman and these other co-defendants in Cook County.
The complaint centered on the type of treatment provided by Dr. Usman and also included charges based on Usman not fully disclosing information like her relationship with doctors' data and her record keeping. The Chicago Tribune had featured Dr. Usman in a very unflattering way in an investigative series called Dubious Medicine, which may have prompted the board to come down hard on Usman. One of the outcomes sought in the complaint was to strip Usman of her license. But that's not what happened in the consent order. There doesn't appear to be anything in the order that would prevent Dr. Usman from providing exactly the same treatment she's always provided. We asked Jeff Levens if that was a fair assessment.
That's a fair assessment, yes.
So why did all this happen?
Well, you know, I do not work for the Department of Professional Regulation. I actually did 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But I don't anymore, and I don't really know the inner workings of that department. They can be very sympathetic and understanding in some cases. They can be totally unreasonable in other cases, and whatever their methods are not known to me. And when this case first started out, I felt they were being unreasonable. The Tribune had written some inflammatory articles at the beginning, but then it sort of went away. And so while we know that the Tribune reporters were in the background trying to, keep an eye on the case, they weren't writing about it. And my guess is that took some of the pressure off of the chief medical prosecutor at the department. We then had a settlement conference in, I think, October 2013. Usually when we have one of these conferences, I go in with my client, and one attorney and one member of the medical disciplinary board are present for the department. But when we walked into the room for the settlement conference in Dr. Usman's case, it was a full room. There were 3 board members, 2 medical coordinators, and 2 attorneys. We had an interesting discussion. We tried to dispel some of their more irrational notions, and then it ended. They gave us a settlement proposal, which we still felt was unreasonable, and we began preparing for trial. The trial was actually going to begin in mid-February 2015, and there were some 2 weeks reserved for the hearing. And I had filed a motion asking for a larger venue for the hearing because I had been told that more than 1,000 supporters of Dr. Usman were going to be coming in from all over the country to observe the proceedings. And then the chief medical prosecutor approached me and said, why don't we talk about this some more? And we did, and we came up with what you see there.
And the divorce and custody hearing that started all this? Well, the 2 parents got divorced, and Attorney Levens tells us that Mr. Komen got custody, but not because of anything related to the autism treatment. He simply had more money and a house, which made him appear to be the better parent to provide continuing care for his autistic child. Now, we sought out a spokesperson from the Illinois Department of Professional and Financial Regulation to comment on why they did what they did, but they refused to provide one, even though they did respond to questions from the Chicago Tribune. Susan Hoffer, the spokeswoman who was interviewed by the Tribune, did repeat one of her answers in one of our several emails asking for comment, saying simply that consent orders are generally more conciliatory than the state's complaints. In the order, Dr. Usman neither admits nor denies any of the charges based on treatment protocol. To settle claims of poor record-keeping and improper administration of informed consent, she will pay $10,000 in fines, be placed on probation, attend some continuing education classes, and have some of her patient records reviewed by another doctor. That doctor is also an alternative medicine practitioner who holds many of the same beliefs on patient treatment held by Dr. Usman. And that's the story of the custody battle that turned into a fight over how doctors treat autism. Nancy?
But there's more to the story, and that's the part the website Quackwatch played in these cases. Tim Yancey talked with Steve Barrett, who runs Quackwatch, and we'll have that part of the story when we return.
Our goal is to give Megan room to be different.
I'm Temple Grandin, and you are watching the Autism Channel.
Our lead story today is our exclusive investigation of the attempt to stop Dr. Anju Usman of Naperville, Illinois, from practicing medicine, which ended with a consent decree approved on Christmas Eve, which allows her to continue to practice. One of the major players in this story is Steve Barrett, and Tim Yancey talked with Mr. Barrett as part of the exclusive report.
There are many different treatments for autism, and some of them are just plain controversial. One of the most controversial is the use of chelation. The theory behind this treatment is that autism in some patients is caused by an accumulation of heavy metals. These are believed to come from many sources. One of them is claimed to be mercury in vaccines, though mercury was removed from pediatric vaccines at the turn of the century. Chelation treatment was one of the primary protocols of so-called DAN doctors. DAN, or Defeat Autism Now, maintained a registry of doctors offering these alternative treatments until 2011. But even though the DAN registry is gone, there are still many doctors who offer such treatments, and the lab doctors' data provides testing for these metals. Their test methods themselves are controversial. Enter Quackwatch, a website run by Steve Barrett, adored by the skeptic movement and rather roundly hated by people who believe alternative medicine is a better choice than traditional treatment, which many say offers them few choices of therapy. In our last segment, Carl Newbiel interviewed the attorney for Dr. Anju Usman, who placed his client's difficulties squarely at the feet of Mr. Barrett. We contacted him for comment and asked him what we asked Dr. Usman's attorney. What change has this consent order brought about? Can't Dr. Usman provide the exact same therapies she was providing before this all began?
I don't think anybody knows what the board has in mind. The settlement did not specify what she could and couldn't do. She's going to have a record review. It's not a review done in the usual way that boards order, in that it doesn't look like the, first of all, I think she was influential in picking the reviewer. And secondly, the order doesn't say what she can and can't do. So I think what will happen is she's going to send 10 cases quarterly. It's going to be reviewed. The board's going to see what she's doing, and what the board will do with that information, I don't think anybody knows. I'm disappointed in the board's order because the complaint specified that she did a number of things wrong that had no justification. For example, she diagnosed 2 children with heavy metal toxicity and treated them with chelation. And chelation has no value for the treatment of autism. And neither of the kids had any metal toxicity. I think the board should have said that she should have ordered her to stop doing the improper testing and the improper diagnosing and the improper treatment with chelation therapy. Now, she may feel that while she's in the hot seat, it might not be such a good idea. And I think she's certainly vulnerable. I think if she continues to chelate autistic children for non-existent metal toxicity, that maybe somebody's going to catch on and make another complaint to the board.
The attorney for Dr. Usman and doctor's data has accused you of being behind this whole thing and is claiming that you have defamed them, have written negatively about them, and are interfering with their practice. How would you respond to that?
Well, some of that is accurate in that I'm very much concerned about what the laboratory is doing, and I've written about it. There's nothing false about what, I've never written anything false, and they haven't actually identified anything false. Their suit is a bunch of fluff. The fact is that people go to a number of doctors that do chelation therapy. They have a urine sample obtained. They're given a chelating drug which raises the amount of lead or mercury in their urine, and then they're told that they're toxic. This is an example of a test, and this graph over here compares the numbers that they claim are essentially normal or reference values with the values on the provoked test. And it shows that quite commonly that some of these lines go into the red zone. It's just like a traffic light. The fact of the matter is that provoked testing is not a legitimate test on which you can, provoked testing does not provide a legitimate basis for diagnosing metal toxicity. And that was even mentioned in at least one of the complaints by the board against Dr. Usman. As far as whether I'm, quote, behind it, I occasionally refer people who have been victimized to attorneys, and I've referred lots of people to attorneys. I did recommend an attorney to Mr. Coleman. He went there. The attorney thought he had a case, but their idea that I'm behind it is a legal, is a sort of a fictitious or a bogus legal strategy. Oh, I'm behind it. So what? Even if I can't be totally responsible. I didn't treat the boy. I'm not a lawyer who decided there's a case. The lawyer decided there's a case and invested a lot of time and money in pursuing it. He made the decision. I didn't. The board made the decision to file a complaint against Dr. Usman, and the complaint was essentially upheld. They would like to somehow, what they're trying to do is to convince the court that somehow I'm responsible for damages because I did what I did. And what I did was what a good citizen should do, which is if you see something wrong, try to do something about it. And what they're doing is wrong. Any number of state boards and professional agencies have said that provoked testing, which is when you give a chelating agent and then collect urine and measure the metal content, provoked testing is not a legitimate test. In the doctor's data is suing me for writing an article, and in the article, I have a list of one after another of the regulatory actions that boards have taken against doctors who do chelation therapy, use provoked testing, etc. It's been banned in a couple of, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it's been banned. A couple of states have banned doctors from doing it ever. Oregon has said it's substandard practice. Washington just creamed the doctor who used it on a child who was chelated over a period of many years. The child in the Coleman case, I think, was started on chelation when he was about 3 years old, and it went on intermittently for years and years and years. And that's terrible treatment.
So after all this, we're to a great degree back where we started before Dr. Usman came under scrutiny. She can perform chelation, and Steve Barrett of Quackwatch continues publishing articles attacking it as ineffective. Her supporters are still lauding her, and we have yet to see if the lawsuit against her will be refiled. We'll continue to follow this story as it develops.
You've probably noticed that on every broadcast we present a list of upcoming events. Barbara Sharp covers those events for us, and on her first broadcast, she has information about how your event can get on the list. Barbara?
You've probably noticed this part of the Autism World News. It's our crawl. On Bloomberg, it's a financial ticker. On Al Jazeera America or CNN, it's news headlines. But here at the Autism Channel, it's a list of upcoming conventions, fundraisers, walks, basically any kind of event or gathering that might be of interest to the ASD community. We'll try our best to identify them as they're announced, but you can help us with that by sending information to events@theautismchannel.tv. If you're involved in running the event, let us know that too, because every Monday I'll be here to talk about one or two of the events we feature with the event's organizers or speakers or presenters. And if you're hosting a convention or conference where there's a call for papers, we want to share that with our audience as well. So let us know what's going on with autism where you are, and we'll help you get the word out.
Remember, that's events@theautismchannel.tv. For our news team and everyone at the Autism Channel, join us again as we unlock the wonders of autism. See you next time. I'm Nancy Quinones.
Autism is found around the globe in every culture. You are not alone in the effort to nurture and support people with autism. This is the Autism Channel.